Okay, everyone, thank you very much for attending this webinar. I hope that you're going to get some value from it. I want to just give a bit of background as to why we thought this was important. In our business, we work directly with hundreds of companies who import food products to the US from all over the world, Europe, Asia, the UK, Canada, Mexico, almost any of the more developed economies. And a lot of those companies are selling on Amazon, or they're selling products into warehouses and so on. So they thought that the cost of importing products to the US could go up by 20 or 25%. It sends shivers down the spine of many business owners who are just trying to grow their company and get on with their day to day. We really detected this from a few conversations with customers. They were worried about tariffs. No one seemed to know what's going on. So we pulled together this presentation to bring some context to this and summarize where things are at right now and give some ideas for how you can mitigate these risks going forward. So on the call today, I actually have a highly experienced customs broker by the name of James R. Roman, and I'm going to introduce him a little bit later on. Anyway, James will be able to answer some questions that you might have. So please do use the Q&A as I go along to log your question. And then when we get to that question, either I can answer the question or James can answer the question if it's a technical customs issue. So let's get on with it. So the topics we're going to cover today are, firstly, the overview of US food tariffs in terms of where things are at right now and what's changed and what is changing. Also, the current and future risks. A little look at this because we are in a very volatile situation right now. We're going to look at some tariff reduction strategies and some new market opportunities. And we will have a look at some suggested best practices and insights, followed by a Q&A with James Roman from Juliana Lim CHB, a licensed customs broker in the US. So do use the chat to post your questions for later. So a little bit about us first off. We are based in the UK and also in the US. I'm based right under this yellow dot here in Scotland, as you may hear by my voice. Quite a few of you may know me already, but I know there are quite a lot of new names that I don't know on the call today. We also have Fabrizio, who's based in Florida and represents Promority Global Import Agent in the US for us. And he may be the first point of contact that a new customer of Promority Global Import Agent may speak to, more likely than not, 99 out of 100. We also have a development team in India. Many of you who know us know that we are a software company and a technical compliance services company combined, and our software team is based out of India. We have various partners throughout the world who we work with in terms of compliance partners, customs brokers partners, and logistics partners. And these are some examples of where some of these partners are located. This is a little bit of an overview of who's who in the business. This is our software development team. This is our compliance team. And then our head of US operations is Fabrizio. And then there's myself there as well. Just an idea of some of the customers we work with. They are from all over UK, very large, well-known brands. We have also carried out compliance work for some other very well-known brands, such as Emirates in the past. And we help importers in the UK, also in the US, with their compliance needs through our software and our services. In doing the US compliance work, we have to date documented over 2,000 FSVP shipments, where we act as the FSVP importer for compliance purposes. And this is on a wide variety of products, human food, pet foods, dietary supplements, etc., many of which are being sold on Amazon. And we've assisted many of these companies with detention release support and navigating through customs. So we do have a lot of first-hand experience in terms of dealing with the typical issues which arise when trying to import your products into the US. In this time, we've created over 700 FSVPs, that's foreign supplier verification programs, or compliance systems for FDA inspection, again, across a very wide variety of food products. We've reviewed over 600 labels, and we've filed more than 400 FDA registrations. So we've got a lot of experience with the US across a very wide range of products, very wide range of situations, and we can bring some of that experience today to this discussion on tariffs. So the US market is quite simply the biggest grocery market in the world. Everyone that's here, or almost everyone anyway, is involved in food manufacturing and or exporting to the US or importing into the US. And everyone understands the size of the commercial opportunity in the US. It's a growing market. So between 2019 and 2025, it's gone from 58 billion of online US grocery spending by consumers to 221 billion. The biggest online retailers, and we're using online for a very good reason. It's often the quickest way to get to market in a new country when you don't have brick and mortar distribution chains already set up. Biggest players in the online grocery market are Walmart, Amazon, then Kroger, Target, and then Albertsons. And between Amazon and Walmart, it's approximately 50% of the market. So these are two really important things to take away from this, is that if you're dealing with Amazon and Walmart, you do a lot of business there, and you have tariff exposure, then this could present a significant risk to your business in terms of sales. As price goes up, we all know what happens to demand. Demand goes down. A further look at who the top 10 trading food nations are. The data I'm going to show you here is really just on agri-foods, but this can be used as a proxy for understanding foods as a whole, because where countries are selling agri-foods into the US, they tend also to be selling grocery type products, supplements, and so on as well. But the key point is that the top 10 are China, Mexico, Canada, Japan, European Union, and then we're into South Korea, Vietnam, Philippines, Colombia, and Taiwan in terms of the agri-food. Notice that the UK isn't even on that list. Quite a lot of UK imports into the US actually are things like Scottish whisky, which is a fabulous export for Scotland, and kind of high value premium products there as well. But we do have several customers who are effectively grocery importers and sellers who could be heavily affected by either European or UK tariffs of any significance in that market. So we're very much watching this with interest as well. So taking this a step further and looking at where threats have been issued and what has happened so far, the key point is that these red ones here are where threats have been issued or implemented. So, for example, I think everyone knows that Canada and Mexico were served with a threat of 25% tariffs unless they did something about border security and so on. And both those countries agreed to send 10,000 troops to the border in order to combat illegal immigration and opioid and fentanyl imports, apparently from China, etc., coming through their borders. So there's been a moratorium on those threats until basically the end of this month, when that's going to be looked at again. One of the very first issues that came up was Colombia, where the Colombian government refused entry of deported immigrants on aircraft, and they were immediately threatened with tariffs, and the whole thing was resolved within 48 hours because Colombia gave in to the request to send these illegal immigrants back to Colombia, etc. So we know about these particular tariff threats, which were then rescinded or delayed, but these could still come back up again, depending on what actually happens with the other side of the agreement that President Trump is looking for. China has been hit with tariffs of 10% on many products and 25% on things like steel and other goods. So China, as you'll see, is one of the biggest importers into the US and actually has a very big trade deficit there as well. So these are all the ones where threats have been issued or implemented. We also have a category which I'm calling threats mentioned with intent. So these are places where threats have not yet been implemented, and effectively Europe is the number one on that list. And I fully expect, and I think a lot of people expect, that Europe is going to be the next area. And we can see from what's happening on the news right now There's a lot of disruption happening, especially around Ukraine and Europe and so on there as well. So these threats are maybe not only to do with trade, there's geopolitical issues at play as well. Other countries where threats have been mentioned are the BRICS countries. So Russia, Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, South Africa, and Brazil have all been threatened with 100% tariffs unless they agree to certain things with Donald Trump. These countries are worried, and we've got customers in South Africa, for example, who are, of course, very concerned about 100% tariffs on their product coming into the US, because that level of tariffs is a business killer if you're a small, mid-sized company. We've heard of lighter threats mentioned against Australia and the UK, particularly around tax such as VAT, for example. We've yet to see what's going to happen there, but everything can change in an instant in these disruptive times that we are in from a trade perspective. And then finally, we've got geopolitical threats to do with President Trump wanting to take over Greenland for national security purposes, the Panama Canal as well, and of course, Denmark over here in Europe. So there's a lot of different things which have been threatened, but really only China has been implemented so far, and we're waiting to see what happens with Mexico and Canada. European Union and UK are likely to be next on the list in terms of this evolving situation. So in terms of trade deficit, this is one of the key areas which President Trump is looking to address. Then, the top 5 countries with the biggest trade deficits for all goods are China, European Union, Mexico, Vietnam, and Japan. And then Canada is at number 6. So if the objective is to reduce the trade deficit and get more revenue from the imports into the US, then it's highly likely that the top 5 countries here would be targets for such an approach. So China's already got some initial tariffs at least. I believe the European Union will be next, and we'll see what happens with Mexico and Canada, but Vietnam and Japan are likely to be on the list as well, because that's where the biggest returns for a businessman like President Trump will come. And that's only further illustrated here by this chart, shows you the relative proportion of the top 10 in terms of the percentage. So why is this happening? So President Trump wants to protect US jobs. He wants to reduce the trade deficit and to ensure that US gets a fair trade deal with the rest of the world. He's also mentioned national security in the case of Canada and Mexico, for example, securing their border. And he's also mentioned repeatedly that he believes that tariffs are a great way for the US to generate revenue. In fact, in terms of what is actually happening in the US right now, a lot of jobs are being cut from government, including the FDA. In fact, the head of the FDA food division resigned because of all of the layoffs of new FDA food safety inspectors, which took place in the last few weeks. Also, in places like Egypt and Africa, USAID was pulled out in 24 hours. They had to get on a plane and come home, and all the funding was cancelled for these kind of things. So President Trump is clearly reducing costs of what he sees as a bloated government, and also through generating revenue in terms of tariffs, but clearly he's also getting more traction with countries where he sees there is a problem. Canada, Mexico, for example, Colombia, another good example. Ultimately, his goal is to boost US production by reshoring production of goods that could be made there. Clearly, there are costs with US consumers because the importers are really liable for the tariffs, but the foreign exporters are the ones which are going to be affected by a reduction in demand due to increased price and less competitiveness. So that's just a bit of the backdrop there. What are the possible impacts? So the EU is facing potential tariffs of 20% plus if this goes ahead and a negotiated deal cannot be reached. This would be a combination of tit-for-tat tariffs on relevant products, including food, and also on VAT, for example. In the UK, VAT has been specifically mentioned, an indirect tax on US products being imported into the UK. So that is an area where there's likely to be negotiation between the US and UK governments on trade, perhaps making US products exempt from VAT? Who knows? All of that stuff is really pure speculation at this point in time. China, we already have a minimum of 10% and as high as 25% tariffs on some goods coming from China. Mexico and Canada are pending, and as for the rest, we don't know. The rest of the world is waiting to see if they're going to be on the hit list for tariffs. I think it's worth at this stage looking at how tariffs work and how they're enforced in the US. And the starting point for this is the HS tariff code, which is used to classify products according to how much customs duties are going to be due on products being imported into the US. So we'll talk more about HS codes in a moment. So they determine the rate of tariff, and the customs broker is the entity which will check the HS code when a product is being imported and apply the tariff rate for duties to be paid. The duties are collected by customs and paid through to the IRS. So they go straight through into government funds. And that is why this is an attractive target for President Trump. So the third stage is looking at the country of origin and if any free trade deals are applicable to that particular product for that HS code. And therefore, tariffs can be adjusted at that point to suit any country of origin and trade deals. So we'll talk again about country of origin rules in a moment, because these are a really interesting and potentially powerful tool for re-engineering your tariffs if needed. So all of this information is used in conjunction with the customs valuation, which must be accurate. I've seen a lot of examples of people making really silly customs valuations and trying to reduce their tariffs and ending up paying a lot more than they expected in terms of customs fees. And then they pay the duties. And at any stage in any of these 5 steps, there can be enforcement of US customs. The enforcement can be fines, refusal of entry, destruction of product, re-exportation of the product with the additional costs which come with that, and potentially an import ban in very serious cases, which then makes sure that that market opportunity is then off limits. So understanding how tariffs work is really important to be able to understand what we can do about minimizing our exposure to tariffs. I've come up with 6 potential strategies here that you might want to consider. Some of them are obvious, maybe some are not quite so obvious. So when we look at country of origin rules, which we'll talk about in a second, we really need to think about our supply chain. So where the product's being made, how much of those products are high tariff products are in the actual product, and therefore can we review the supply chain to avoid paying higher tariffs. And when you're talking about tariffs of 10, 20 or 25%, it's worthwhile reviewing the supply chain to see if there are other suppliers in lower tariff countries that you can use for your products. The next one is to review the HS code itself. The HS code system is very comprehensive, but it's quite easy to choose the wrong code if you don't know what you're doing or you make a mistake, which may result in you paying higher tariffs than you need to. So again, in the Q&A, we can perhaps have James Roman tell us a little bit more about some of the processes for that. We can use free trade zones. So a free trade zone is where you can land products in the US. They can stay there and the customs duties are not due until the product leaves the free trade zone for US commerce. Again, this is something, I'm not an expert on that part, but I'm aware of their existence and what their function is in general terms. So perhaps James can maybe talk about free trade zones when we get to the Q&A. So just on that point, please do keep putting the Q&A questions that you might have along the way. There are also exemptions or reductions in tariffs and refunds for certain cases which may be applicable. Again, coming to the point of having some customs expertise in the corner who can maybe help with some of the opportunities that may be available there. Reformulation and modification of products is another area. We have, for example, several customers who buy raw materials from China. They bring them into the UK, and in some of those cases, they may want to look at other countries of origin for those raw materials, or create new products, which are blends rather than pure products. And that way they can reclassify their tariff code for those new products, for example. So reformulation and modification of products is clearly one of the areas where you have the most control in terms of what you can do regarding tariffs. And then finally, negotiating cost sharing with customers and suppliers is another obvious area where the opportunity to reset things financially to ensure that you can still operate your business in a sustainable and profitable way. Talking about tariffs, I've identified some best practices that you really want to home in on in terms of not only paying the right tariff, but doing it legally. Use the correct HS code, and there is the opportunity to request a US Customs and Border Protection binding rule by applying for a reduced tariff or lower tariff or an exemption based on certain criteria. That is the whole area of customs brokers who will know that landscape. And again, so having a customs broker on this call and as a partner is a useful tool in navigating our way through this. Find a legitimate lower duty classification for the product. So just making sure that you've got the most optimal tariff code. But professional advice is going to be needed whatever you do here. Free trade agreements. Be aware of where the free trade agreements are. It could be that if there's a free trade agreement in place for particular countries where you can have your product manufactured or get your ingredients from, that could be useful. But you also need to keep in mind the rules of origin, which we're going to look at in detail in a second. And for all of these things, you need to keep proper documentation in case things are challenged by customs or anyone else along the way here. There are duty drawbacks and free trade zones, as I've already mentioned. I'm not an expert in these areas. James can maybe say a few words about duty drawbacks in addition to free trade zones when we get to that stage. And then there's supply chain engineering. So looking at production locations, swapping out ingredients, negotiating, and cost sharing. So all of these areas are going to require help to get there if you want to get there efficiently. And these are some of the areas where we may be able to help and facilitate. We've identified 6 country of origin rules that you need to be aware of for importing products into the US and if you want to be claiming certain tariff rates, etc. So the first one is substantial transformation. And we've seen a lot of examples where potential clients of ours think that packing and labeling is substantial transformation. It is not. That does not qualify, legally speaking, for the country of origin being in the UK as opposed to, say, China, for example. So transformation is when the product changes its nature, changes its name, and is a different product. So you could take grain and make it into flour, or you could take collagen and other additives and blend them together and it becomes a new product. And if that happens in the UK, then the chances are you will be able to get a UK tariff classification, for example, versus if it happened in China. So these are the sorts of things that we need to think of. But it's always important to remember that de minimis activities like packing and labeling do not qualify as a substantial transformation. So the next one is tariff shift for the free trade agreements. So, for example, if a product is made from foreign ingredients but it's assembled or processed in a free trade agreement country, for example, Mexico or Canada, it must undergo a tariff classification change to qualify for preferential duty rates. So again, there's some detail in all of this you would need to look at to see if you would qualify for a tariff shift and on what basis. Then we have percentage-based origin. Some trade agreements require that a minimum percentage of the final product's value comes from the free trade agreement country. So there's rules under each individual free trade agreement which allow us to take advantage of reductions or eliminations of tariffs. Then we have the direct shipment rule, which states that goods must be shipped directly from the originating country to the US without passing through a non-qualifying country. So, for example, if a food product comes from Vietnam and it's shipped through China, where minor processing or de minimis processing occurs, the US may still consider it as Chinese, which is then subject to higher tariffs. So it's just really important to be clear about these things. And then marking and labeling, if you're saying made in Mexico or product of China on the label and it turns out to be false, then that can result in penalties and seizure of your products and ultimately destruction of the product as well. So being able to document this and be able to provide proof to customs quickly about the country of origin of the product and or its ingredients is important for customs clearance. Finally, we have special Section 301 and anti-dumping rules, which are all about products that come from a high tariff country like China, but they're finished in a different country. US Customs may examine if it was merely repackaged or if it was genuinely transformed. So a lot of this does come back to the transformation side of things in terms of these rules. So hopefully this will give you some good takeaways in terms of country of origin and maybe think about how this may affect your products and what you might want to do next. That's all of the kind of doom and gloom and the strategy of how we can minimize that. But also there's opportunity. Every cloud has a silver lining. And there certainly is opportunity when you have the prospect of reduced demand or increased prices and therefore reduced demand in the US market. Then what other markets are available? Well, the markets which are closest culturally in terms of food products and supplements to the US are, of course, the UK, EU, and Canada. And each of these marketplaces has strong e-commerce, in other words, Amazon and Shopify and other methods of testing the market, getting your product to market there to build new customers. Clearly, building new customers takes time and investment. However, these markets are probably on a par with the level of compliance and everything else that you need to do to get into the US. So if you can get your product into the US in terms of compliance, there's a very strong chance that we can get the product into the UK, EU, and also Canada, because they all have very similar, they're called different things, but they all have very similar regulatory needs in here. Many of you may be supplements manufacturers or brand owners. One of the big trends in online is supplements. It's growing at a big rate of knots. It's double-digit growth every year for the past 3-4 years, and it shows no sign of slowing down. But there's plenty of opportunities for other types of products there as well: shelf-stable, ambient, grocery, keto-friendly, high-protein, snack bars, even drinks and so on as well. So there's plenty of opportunity there. And looking at each of the market sizes, so Amazon US is by far the biggest. Total grocery sales of around about 36 billion, whereas the total in all sales for UK is 26 billion pounds. So only a portion of that is going to be grocery sales. Germany, $37 billion in total sales, and in Canada, 17.3 Canadian dollars in revenue there. But the US is also the most competitive market with 2.5 million sellers, 1.16 in the UK, and then Amazon, I don't have individual figures here. In Canada, there are fewer sellers. But clearly, UK, EU, and Canada, between them, have a market size which is comparable with the US. And it does make sense to spread the risk. Don't have all the eggs in one basket. All four have very strong Amazon FBA infrastructure, and the competitors there like Shopify and others also have very strong routes to market there as well. All four have very similar food safety regulatory requirements and labeling requirements. Now, you cannot use the same label in all four markets, but the information which is going to be on the label is broadly similar, with a few differences such as allergens and the formatting of the nutritional fact panels and so on. So if you can succeed in the US market, you can also succeed in these other markets. So how can we help you? We've got a number of things that we can do to help. If you have a particular product and you're concerned about the tariffs for that product, then talk to us and we can do some consulting on that with you and give you some advice. We can involve our customs brokers friends and work out a plan for how you might be able to at least have a contingency in terms of new suppliers, new ingredients, new formulations, new strategies, etc. And of course, we'll keep you informed on developments in this area. And then when it comes to new market entry, we can help you research and develop new markets, particularly UK, EU, and Canada. We are experts in this area. We know and can research all of the regulatory requirements for just about any product, and we can assist, of course, in the compliance services to get you to market quickly and give the ongoing support that you are going to need. These are the services that we are able to offer you in these areas, and existing customers who we've already done compliance work for in the US, for example, we will already have a lot of the information that we need to help you get into these markets. So we can definitely do something competitively for you on that in terms of reducing the cost of that new market entry. Remember also that we have a lot of contacts and a network of partners out there who are involved in logistics, customs brokerage, distribution, and also we are an Amazon seller partner network partner, and we assist those Amazon sellers with kind of things that we can help with. So with that, we're going to get to the Q&A. Allow me to introduce you to the audience, please, James. James has been working with Primority Global Import Agent over the last 18 months or so, and he's been invaluable in just reaching out, getting advice. When we are looking to assist companies who are looking for a good customs broker, we routinely pass them on to James and the team at Juliana CHB. James he's an expert in FDA and USDA import regulations, qualified customs broker. He has worked with clients like Kendamil, Samyang, and McCormick Foods. Juliana CHB also has a sister logistics company called Brightstar Logistics, and he is instrumental in driving that forward as well. So it's not just customs, it's logistics also. The focus being about efficient routing, competitive pricing, on-time service, etc. Juliana Lim CHB is a family-orientated customs brokerage business in SoCal, which I believe is short for South California. Is that right, James?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. I
So,
have to remember my audience here. Yeah. Sorry.
right, so your audience here is there's probably about 50-60% might be existing customers of ours, either on our global import agent business or in our Primority compliance software business. And the rest are likely to be UK manufacturers who are interested in the landscape in terms of this tariff situation, etc. I wonder if you could maybe just give a little bit of explanation before I get to the Q&A. I've got a number of questions here, but I wonder if you could perhaps give a little bit of clarity on free trade zones and duty drawbacks in particular, because that's the area I didn't get to research that much.
Yeah, thank you so much, James. And gosh, it's amazing. I don't know. I think you should move here to the US and take the exam, James. I think you're ready to become a broker yourself. A lot of the information you gave took the words right out of my mouth. As we were going, I was like, oh, yeah, I think I can see we can talk about substantial transformation and things like that. And you already got all of it. So, you, yeah, I think you're ready. I think you're ready to come and take the exam. You just have to live here, I guess. But I don't know if you want to do that. There's a lot of good scotch where you are.
Yeah,
Um, I
exactly.
might have to move to you. But anyway, yeah. So for FTZs and duty drawbacks, so FTZs are a bit of a unicorn, kind of a mythical thing here in the U.S. In principle, in reading the regulations, it makes a lot of sense. It's a really, really theoretically great solution. The only problem is everybody now knows that, and so they're inundated with requests. So they are, although they're provided for in the regulations, they are privately held and owned and operated. So the US government allows them to operate, but they don't operate them. So they're businesses at the end of the day. And you have to apply to the board of foreign trade zone. And there are more and more being added every single day, but they are a special class of warehouse that has a lot of due diligence needed to get up and running, obviously, as they do have that kind of home base type of function where they are pretty much a duty-free zone where things can be substantially transformed and things like that. So bottom line, you have to think of operating in a foreign trade zone as a business proposal to the actual operator of the foreign trade zone. Most of the time they deal with very large industrial clients. And if you're going to be doing any sort of manufacturing, which is kind of the main purpose of the foreign trade zone, you'd have to be supplying your own equipment and things like that. So I don't want to come in and say that it's impossible or that it's not going to happen for you to operate in a foreign trade zone, but it does require some legwork. And unfortunately, it's not as quick and easy as some people may think, just because of the fact that everybody is kind of wise to the idea. As for duty drawback, those are essentially getting 99% of your paid duties refunded after you sell or destroy the items. So duty drawback necessarily implies that you've already imported and paid duties on that. There are different types of drawback, but the most common one would be an unused merchandise drawback. So let's say you import a ton of candy bars and you pay duty and you ended up paying $1 million in duties. That's a lot of candy bars, by the way. Let's say they don't sell, you don't sell a single one, unfortunately. So you go and you sell it to somebody in South Africa or the UAE or somebody or something. Before you re-export it, you get with a customs broker that is able to do drawback. And we are able to do drawback, and you're able to file the paperwork before it leaves. And that's the huge kicker, is you got to get the entry filed before it leaves. Once it leaves, then you can submit the claim to get that drawback. Presuming that everything out correctly, you get 99% of that duty back in the form of a check. Now, a sad disclaimer is Customs did shuffle around the team in Customs that handles the processing of the drawback refunds. And so a lot of our clients that we filed for have taken several years for them to get their money back. So it is unfortunate. It is true. If you can survive without that and you don't mind getting a refund check later down the road to give you a cash infusion later, it's a lovely kind of consolation for unused merchandise but unable to sell in the US market.
So I'm thinking about a practical application of this one. So, for example, we've got higher tariffs. We pay the higher tariffs. We ship a whole load of product to the US. It's going to Amazon FBA. 6 months in, it's not selling because the price is too high. Nothing we can do about that because demand has dropped, price is too high. So we could take that product out of Amazon stock and then re-export it for sale elsewhere, provided the shelf life is good and the product stands up to that. And you could make a duty drawback claim before you ship the product out of the country. Would that be a reasonable example?
Yeah, absolutely. God forbid it, but yeah, that would be a great application of it. Some things that I do want to, kind of put some asterisks on. Certain types of duties are not refundable via drawback. So, for instance, something that a lot of the audience won't deal with, but they might have a friend that deals with it, would be anti-dumping countervailing duties. Those are not to be refunded. Certain China, either Section 232 or 301 duties are actually not able to be refunded. So it's good to kind of take things always, especially James, when you were talking about classification and tariff ruling, it's always great to treat it as on a case by case basis because this is what customs does. So if there's a general rule, it's always good to talk to somebody first. That could go, but as to what exactly and how much is going to be refunded, you got to take it case by case.
Okay, good. I think I've got about 10 or 11 questions. So I'm kind of thinking a bit of a quick fire. So I've got a question here from Chloe Cotard Bonival. I hope I pronounced that correctly. James, have you heard of any restrictions for dairy products coming from Germany because of foot and mouth disease? Still not clear what dairy products are concerned. For example, frozen, dessert, not shelf stable, containing a chocolate that has dairy ingredients. Does this impact or not? Same question related to butter/dry milk protein. Before you answer that one, I mean, I am aware because we've done a number of projects where avian flu, for example, in frozen baked goods coming from Canada into the US, and we had, I would say, quite a difficult time-consuming time getting a USDA import permit for those products because some of the products had milk in them and others just egg on its own. And it was actually quite complicated and took a long time. I think it took 6 weeks to get 8 import permits. But yeah, just to get some clarity from you and your perspective in terms of foot and mouth disease from Germany, dairy products, and so on.
Yeah, what an awesome question. Yeah, in case obviously the person that asked this question definitely knows, but in case the general audience doesn't know, there was FMD, foot and mouth disease, that was discovered in a very small amount was discovered in a isolated region in, I believe, like northeast Germany. Germany is a pretty big country, so it doesn't seem like it's become endemic or anything. But there are some temporary problems with dairy that comes from Germany. Unfortunately, they're treating Germany as that region where the FMD was discovered. So even if your stuff is manufactured hundreds of kilometers away or tens of kilometers away, it's going to be treated the same. So what we've discovered with some of our other clients that are affected in this way, I've talked directly to the USDA. Unfortunately, their staff is not entirely harmonized as of a few weeks ago about how to approach this. Some have said that we need to go ahead and get a permit. Some are saying that no docs are required. It's very confusing. So they themselves are trying to sort it out at this moment. But for now, if you're able to get a VS permit, I would go ahead and get yourself a VS permit. If you ever have any questions, there is a nice VS permitting tool, which I'm sure if you're asking this question, you already know about it. But the USDA has like an interactive VS permitting tool that you can link directly to start your application for your permit. But right now, if it's available, if it's an option, I would go ahead and get your VS permit and then pick it from there. But they might have some additional requirements or things that they want you to do. But if for some reason you're not able to start that permitting process online because the regulation has changed or not, USDA does have, and APHIS specifically has email address you can reach out to try and get that started.
Excellent answer. Thank you very much. Hope that helps, Chloe. So another question from Lewis Ring. This is about your company, James. And Lewis is asking if your company Brightstar offers logistical services such as collecting goods from Hong Kong and bringing them into the US and forwarding to Amazon warehouse, in addition to the customs brokerage service. So I wonder if you could just give a quick answer on that one. I'll try and keep these brief now, go a bit rapid fire to push ahead.
Yeah, I'll keep that in mind. Sorry. But yeah, absolutely. To answer Lewis's question, yeah, we definitely can help with that.
Okay, perfect. So question from Deepa James. Hi, Deepa. I know Deepa, she's one of our customers. So the question here is, if we were to get our packaging from China for nuts grown and processed in Ghana, what will that mean in terms of tariffs? That's a great question. James, I'll let you answer that one.
Yeah, always, I can't speak definitively just based on the facts just like this, but I would assume that the country of origin would still be Ghana.
Would have thought that would be the case. But yeah, as mentioned, all of these things, we don't want to be guessing. So if we're going to answer properly, professionally, answer technical questions, it's always good to just get on a call, get the lowdown, do the research properly, and then give a definitive answer at that point. But thank you for the question,
100%.
Deepa. So from Joseph David Paquette, the question is, would assembling products from components from different countries constitute sufficient transformation? For example, if I assemble in Canada chocolate bag from France into tins from China, would the COO be Canada? I think probably need a bit more detail on that one, but James, would you comment on that?
That's an exam question. I love those kind of brain teaser puzzles, but that would certainly be a situation where we'd want to sit down and get all the facts. That'd be a lovely occasion for a binding ruling. Absolutely. I'm so sorry, but the answer is it really depends on exactly what's going on.
Yeah, no, precisely. So yeah, more detail might be needed there, Joseph. Please do reach out if you're concerned about that and you want to get some more answers. And Lewis, again, is the direct shipment rule only relevant for countries that hold a free trade agreement with the US? If the sender's location lacks such an agreement, will products made in another country be classified as made in the sender's country upon reaching the US port? I think there's two parts to that. So first part, is direct shipment rule only relevant to free trade agreements with the US?
Most of the time, yeah. Unless you're dealing with a sanctioned country, like for the moment, like Russia, North Korea, Cuba, Iran, those kind of countries.
Okay, and then the second part of that, if the sender's location, I'm assuming that we mean the shipper in the country, if the sender's location lacks such an agreement, an FTA, will products made in another country be classified as made in the sender's country upon reaching the US port? That's so confusing to me, but yeah, I don't know if you can answer that one.
No, it's okay. Yeah, no, it really depends on the certain set of facts, but really it goes back to substantial transformation or whether it's grown there or fully obtained in that country. But yeah, definitely want to look at the facts.
Okay, excellent. There's a question about tariffs being refunded via drawback, but I think you've already answered that one, so we'll skip that. And then the final question I have here is from Venu Venkata. If we bring cereals/grain grown in the US and process the products in Canada, tariffs apply if we ship finished product to the US from Canada? That's the question. Do tariffs apply if we ship finished products that have been transformed in Canada back to the US if the country of origin of the original ingredients was the US?
Some question. I would say this almost certainly qualifies for USMCA treatment because the inputs are the USMCA country. Obviously, I would want to look 100% at the facts, but just off the top of my head, this sounds like it would qualify for USMCA, therefore it's duty-free.
Excellent. We still have 40 attendees that have gone the duration here. Thank you very much. I think we peaked at about 55 or something earlier on, But what I would like to do is thank all of you for coming on the webinar. We probably ran over a good bit, but I think it's been very useful. And the fact that so many people stayed so long, I think that shows how useful it has been. But please do contact us, reach out if you need any further assistance or help. And I'd like to thank you, James, for getting up so early and coming and spending some of your valuable time with our audience here today. So we'll see you on the next
Total
one.
pleasure.
We'll stay in
Thank
touch.
you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.